Hi, Eugene Mulero here with Transport Topics, and joining us in our studio is Jeff Davis, Senior Fellow at the Eno Center for Transportation. Jeff, thank you for joining us, and happy Infrastructure Week.
Thank you for having me. Happy Infrastructure Week to you as well.
Thank you. And before we get to Infrastructure Week, let's talk about the THUD bill, because the Senate is considering it and the House is expected to have a markup this week. Is scheduled to have a markup this week. What's it looking like, on the Senate?
The Senate is debating the bill. They did it last night and today. They're also using it as a vehicle to have several test votes this afternoon on everyone's topic of the moment, how to fight the Zika virus. So they're going to have test out 3 different plans, see which one has the most votes. Then I think that will be moved separately to the White House, because this bill won't get signed into law until fall, and they don't want to wait that long for supplemental Zika funding. So once the Zika stuff is done, they'll return to actually debating and voting on relevant amendments to the bill, hopefully, and get it done hopefully by next week.
Okay. Do you see, is the Zika provision, is that going to in any way stall or derail movement on the legislation? Or
no, the House is going to pass its own Zika bill hopefully later this week, and
okay.
I think the Senate is using the transportation HUD bill as a vehicle to have the test votes to figure out what they can match up with the House bill on Zika when it comes over later. I don't think it'll eventually, it won't get hung to the THUD bill long term.
What do you think are going to be some flashpoints on the Senate floor with the THUD bill?
So far, there really haven't been that many controversial amendments that were filed. Everyone seems pretty happy with the bill that was reported from the Appropriations Committee by an almost unanimous margin. There are some amendments that have been filed so far trying to redistribute money for passenger rail. Some senators from the Northeast are always upset that there's not enough money for the Northeast corridor. And there may be some amendments to various language provisions along the way. But so far, there hasn't really been any amendment filed that would be a mortal existential threat to the bill.
Yeah, and this is also a legislation for most of the Transport Topics audience that we care about, because it has a provision setting at 73 the allowable work time for truck drivers, and that's something that Senator Susan Collins of Maine, she pushed to have in the bill.
Yes, Senator Collins, she's the chairman of the subcommittee on transportation and housing appropriations, and she negotiated the 73 number kind of on her own. No one's quite sure publicly how that number was selected, but trying to split the difference between the old restart rule, which she thought was flawed, and the suspension language in last year's appropriations bill law, which actually turns out to have some problems. And in trying to figure out, do you correct that language? Do you go on? She came up with the 73 number. We won't know till later this afternoon what the House bill does. The House is scheduled to release the draft text of its bill later today.
Yeah.
They will mark it up in subcommittee tomorrow, full committee next week. It should be on the floor in early June. So again, it takes 2 to tango. So so far, we haven't seen people have mentioned, several safety interests have mentioned they don't like the 73-hour rule in the Senate bill. The President's office issued a vaguely worded statement on the bill that threatened a veto if non-relevant, objectionable provisions were added, but didn't specifically say that the 73-hour rule rose to that level. It lumped it in with a lot of other provisions. And again, the bill was supported nearly unanimously by Democrats in committee. So if they thought that the 73-hour rule language rose to the level that it by itself could cause a veto, I don't think they would have been so supportive of the bill in general in committee. Even though many of them are not fans of the provision, I think they're not willing to upset the apple cart enough to kill the bill over it.
Okay, so we're going to be paying attention to Senate debate, and also to see what the House Subcommittee on Appropriations and Transportation comes out with and does on Wednesday.
Yes.
Jeff, let's pivot a little bit. We had the FAST Act enacted in December. You have governors pushing for the freight funding authorized in this law. I recently spoke with the Secretary of Transportation in Delaware, who is seeking this Fast Lane, is the name of the freight program, funding. your perspective, how is the the FAST Act being received?
It's being received so far as the best thing that was available in the realm of the possible. Most infrastructure advocates are not satisfied with the dollar amounts provided, but considering that they are much higher than anyone thought was possible before the great funding breakthrough they had in the summer, where they figured out how to take $60 billion from the Federal Reserve and transfer it to the Highway Trust Fund. People they're happy that there's a long-term bill so that states can extend their planning horizons through FY 2020. And the administration is trying to implement the bill as rapidly as possible. But it's a big bill, and you've got to pick and choose what you're going to implement first. And so the administration appears to be prioritizing getting as much money as they can get out the door prior to the Obama administration leaving office. That's their first priority. So they rushed out. The first year of funding under the bill was FY 2016, which was almost 3 months over by the time the FAST Act was signed into law. So they are desperate to get the first FY 16 installment of a bunch of these new discretionary programs, principally the $800 million for the Fast Lane program, get the projects selected and out the door this year, preferably by the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, which coincidentally is also before the fall elections. So many people have been suspicious that there may be some degree, more or less at some times, of politicization in the selection of which projects get approved. And a lot of senators and representatives would dearly love to be able to have a press release at least for a big project out of this program before they face election this fall. So that's not just Fast Line, but other discretionary grant programs as well under the FAST Act appear to be the first priority for implementation. Everything else will take a lot longer.
We had a conversation with Senator Carper of Delaware in which he criticized the FAST Act's funding provisions, and we heard a lot about that when the bill was being debated. And even yesterday, Congressman Sam Graves, the T&I committee, he again talked about the funding provisions in the FAST Act and how their congressional colleagues did not push to raise fuel taxes. Your perspective on how do you react to Carper and Graves coming months later talking about that?
It's fine as long as they're looking forward. Again, the FAST Act will last us through FY 2020, and it gives us that long to hopefully figure out a way to make the trust fund side of the equation solvent in the long term by that point. Because any real solution to this is going to be politically difficult. It's going to require either finding more real money from somewhere, which is always painful, or else it will require cutting the trust fund spending and raising spending from somewhere else, which is also difficult. And it requires different power centers within Congress, to give and take. Somebody's got to lose some authority, somebody gains it. These things are difficult, so hopefully, I think what Mr. Graves is talking about is that you have to start now thinking about these big decisions to be able to try to get a framework in place by 2020 to get the trust fund solvent in a long-term way again. And if you can solve it sooner than that, you can maybe add some money to supplement the FAST Act before the FAST Act ends.
You've done a lot of scholarship looking at congressional efforts to raise fuel taxes.
Yes.
And do you, and you and I talk to a lot of stakeholders, is raising fuel taxes something that you think the next administration can get done? Is that something that we should expect, or is that just not even a conversation anymore?
It's possible. I mean, this administration ruled it out categorically fairly early on in the terms of refusing to raise taxes on people making under $250,000 a year. Because if you view the gas tax as a tax, it is extremely regressive, because Joe minimum wage may pay more gas tax than Bill Gates does, because Bill Gates probably drives a Tesla.
Correct.
So there's no, it's regressive tax in that perspective. If you use it very narrowly for the purposes to benefit the people who pay the gas tax, you can view it as a user charge, and then the progressive calculus does not necessarily apply. However, the more you spend gas tax proceeds on things unrelated to the benefits given to the people who pay at the pump, that argument falls apart. But basically, people shouldn't just look at the highway bill, surface transportation bill, as the vehicle to raise it, because we haven't raised the gas tax to specifically pay for transportation at first since Ronald Reagan in 1982. The tax was raised in 1990 and 1993, but both times in the context of a large global budget deal lowering the deficit. If we're going to have another one of those big budget packages trying to raise hundreds of billions of dollars over multiple years, or if we have a big tax reform bill, either of those might be a vehicle to deal with highway trust fund and gas tax, because both those issues are under the tax committees, not the transportation committees of Congress. So I think people should be looking for the next big budget summit talk or the next big tax reform bill as a possible vehicle to get the painful decisions that will have to be made about transportation financing settled in a context of much larger, much more painful decisions about other kind of unpleasant things that we're going to have to do to make our books balance.
Exactly. Jeff, finally, it's Infrastructure Week, and you guys have, at Eno, you hosted a panel with AASHTO yesterday looking at new technologies and ways that we can improve connectivity in our cities. Tell us, what Eno is doing for Infrastructure Week and your thoughts on the whole week itself.
Our new president, Rob Puentes, moderated a panel at the Chamber at the kickoff event with 4 former secretaries of transportation.
That's right.
2 of whom are on our board of directors, I'm happy to say. Sort of giving an overview of what they can recommend for the next Secretary of Transportation. I believe the video of that's on the Chamber website.
Okay.
We had our technology event yesterday with AASHTO, and we're going to release a paper on the recommendations of our freight working group on Thursday for a long-term method to pay for freight transportation in this country.
Very nice.
Across all modes, not just trucking, but across all modes. So we're looking forward to that and to participating in many of the other events this week to raise awareness of infrastructure's importance and hopefully what can be done to accelerate the repair of such infrastructure.
Is this like our transportation festival, like Jazz Week and, Jazz Fest? Is that the equivalent for us?
Not quite. It's kind of, but remember, it's broader than that. It's also about electrical grid infrastructure, and the Flint, Michigan crisis has focused a particular spotlight on water and sewer infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it's also about the changing roles, because the federal government before the 70s, most of these sewers and drinking water systems in cities never got a dime of federal money. Mass transit never got a dime of federal money before the 60s. So the changing role, the federal role in rivers and harbors goes back to almost 200 years. The federal role in highways goes back 100 years. The federal role in some of these other kinds of infrastructure is much more recent. So as we're trying to balance the needs of all modes of infrastructure, you can kind of look at which are the traditional federal responsibilities, which are new federal responsibilities. It's a good context to debate all those things.
I like it. Jeff, if we can leave it there, thank you for joining us in Capital Agenda. And for all the latest, check out ttnews.com, and Capital Agenda comes out on Tuesdays. Thank you.
Thank you.